First contact surprise. The Arcadian Defense Fleet had never witnessed anything quite like it. Through the crystalline viewing panels of their command ship, Admiral Vexera watched as the human vessel materialized from the void. Unlike the sleek, bioengineered ships of the Arcadian fleet, this vessel was all harsh angles and exposed structural elements, more akin to a mobile fortress than a spaceship. Another primitive species seeking to join the galactic assembly, Vexera commented, her crystalline appendages shifting in what passed for amusement among her kind. At least they managed to achieve faster-than-light travel without destroying themselves. The human ship, designated as TES Prometheus, had responded to their distress beacon, a fact that still rankled the proud admiral. The Arcadians had been fighting the Void Swarm for 3 cycles, watching helplessly as these extra-dimensional entities consumed entire star systems. Their advanced technology, refined over millennia, had proved ineffective against an enemy that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. Captain Maya Rodriguez of the TES Prometheus studied the holographic display of the Arcadian command ship. Her dark eyes reflected the shifting patterns of data as her neural interface processed the sensor readings. Interesting, she mused, drawing the attention of her crew. Their hull composition suggests they've optimized for energy weapon encounters. They've never faced an enemy that uses kinetic weapons. The Void Swarm chose that moment to make its appearance. Reality itself seemed to tear open as dozens of writhing, darkness-shrouded forms emerged from subspace. Their very presence caused the local space-time to distort, making traditional targeting systems useless. By the first light, breathed Vexera's second-in-command, 3 Omega-class entities. We need to retreat. Begging your pardon, Admiral Vexera. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the communication channel, carrying an odd note of enthusiasm. We'd like to test a theory, if you'll permit us. Please maintain your current position. Before Vexera could formulate a properly scathing response about the foolishness of primitive species, the Prometheus began to move. But unlike the graceful maneuvers of Arcadian ships, this vessel moved like a predator, each motion precise and purposeful. What are they doing? Vexera demanded, watching as the human ship deployed what appeared to be primitive projectile weapons. Those won't even reach the void entities. The words died in her speech centers as the projectiles suddenly split apart, revealing themselves to be carrier platforms for thousands of smaller objects. Each one contained a miniaturized fusion core and a payload of what the humans would later describe as weaponized mathematics. The void entities, used to dealing with energy weapons and traditional physics, found themselves confronted with projectiles that carried encoded quantum equations. As they struck their targets, these equations forcibly rewrote local spacetime, creating microscopic points of absolute order in the chaos of the void entity structure. The effect was devastating. The Omega-class entities, which had shrugged off the most powerful Arcadian weapons, began to collapse in on themselves as areas of their non-Euclidean forms were forced to conform to standard physics. Fascinating, Rodriguez commented over the still-open channel. Our theoretical physics department will be pleased to know their calculations were correct. The entities aren't immune to physical laws. They just operate on a different mathematical framework. Once you force them to play by standard rules, even partially, they can't maintain their form. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than 15 minutes. Where 3 Omega-class void entities had been, there was now only empty space and some very interesting readings for the human scientists to analyze. Vexera stood in stunned silence, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that indicated deep shock. The humans had just casually solved a problem that had baffled the most advanced civilization in the known galaxy, and they had done it with what they considered basic physics and simple kinetic weapons. Captain Rodriguez, Vexera finally managed to transmit. I believe we need to have a detailed discussion about human warfare capabilities, and perhaps we need to reconsider what we mean by primitive. We'd be happy to share notes, Rodriguez replied, and Vexera could have sworn she heard a smile in the human's voice. After all, We're rather new to this whole galactic community thing. I'm sure there's a lot we could learn from each other." As Vexra processed this response, she couldn't help but wonder what other surprises these humans had in store. Perhaps, she reflected, watching the deceptively crude-looking human ship, being primitive wasn't quite the disadvantage she had always assumed it to be. The hidden strength. The Arcadian Central Laboratory was unlike anything Captain Rodriguez had ever seen. Crystalline structures pulsed with bioorganic computing processes, and holographic displays showed mathematical formulas so complex they seemed to bend reality itself. Yet despite all this advanced technology, the Arcadian scientists wore expressions of pure bewilderment as they studied the simple wooden cube sitting on their examination table. "You're saying this contains your weapon designs?" Senior researcher Ixtil asked, his crystalline form shifting in confusion. "But it's made of dead plant matter." Rodriguez smiled, reaching out to touch the cube. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most elegant. We call it a puzzle box. Each face contains a different mathematical riddle. Solve one, and it reveals a piece of our defense strategy against the Void Swarm." "But why not simply share the information directly?" another researcher asked. "Because understanding how we think is just as important as understanding what we think," Rodriguez replied. "Your civilization has achieved incredible things through linear advancement. You build upon each discovery in a logical progression. Humans, we tend to leap sideways." As if to demonstrate her point, she began manipulating the cube. Her fingers danced across the wooden surface, solving patterns that seemed random to the Arcadian observers. With each solution, holographic projections sprang to life, showing fragments of human battle tactics and weapon designs. "Remarkable," Ixtil whispered as the full picture began to emerge. "Your species deliberately introduces chaos into your solutions." "Not chaos," Rodriguez corrected. "Creativity. The Void Swarm operates on mathematical principles that defy our understanding of physics. So instead of trying to defeat them with pure logic, we embrace unconventional thinking." The final projection showed a complete simulation of the new human-designed defense system. Instead of trying to directly counter the Void Swarm's reality-warping abilities, the humans had developed a network of small, automated platforms that would create localized pockets of quantum stability. These reality anchors wouldn't try to destroy the void entities, they would simply make it impossible for them to exist in our space. "But this is primitive," one of the younger researchers blurted out, immediately ducking their crystalline head in embarrassment. Rodriguez laughed. "Exactly. The Void Swarm has evolved to counter advanced energy weapons and sophisticated shield systems. But they've never encountered something as simple as being told, 'No, you can't break physics here.'" Ixtil's form pulsed with sudden understanding. Like trying to combat a virus with advanced medications, when sometimes the simple solution is to just raise the temperature. "Now you're thinking like a human," Rodriguez grinned. "We're not trying to outfight them. We're trying to make their existence here inconvenient." The laboratory erupted in a flurry of activity as the Arcadian scientists began integrating human concepts into their own research. Rodriguez watched with satisfaction as these highly advanced beings began approaching problems from new angles, combining their incredible technical knowledge with human-style lateral thinking. "Captain," Ixtil approached her later, holding another puzzle box, this one made from Arcadian crystal. "We've attempted to recreate your teaching tool, but with our own modifications. Would you be willing to attempt it?" Rodriguez took the crystal cube, feeling its warm pulse against her palm. "This is what collaboration looks like," she said softly. "Not just sharing technology, but sharing ways of thinking." As she began working on the Arcadian puzzle box, she reflected on how far they'd come in such a short time. The Arcadians had initially seen humans as primitive newcomers to the galactic stage. Now they were beginning to understand that sometimes being primitive meant being unpredictable. And in a fight against an enemy that relied on mathematical certainty, unpredictability might be the greatest weapon of all. The crystal cube chimed softly as she solved its first layer, revealing a perfect blend of Arcadian precision and human intuition. Perhaps, she thought, this was how you truly defeated an enemy like the Void Swarm, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the simple, devastating power of two species learning to think differently together. Alliance of necessity. Admiral Vexera stood before the combined fleet, a sight that would have been impossible just weeks ago. Through the quantum-enhanced viewing screen of her flagship, she observed the peculiar formation. Sleek Arcadian vessels interspersed with angular human warships, their contrasting designs creating an almost artistic pattern against the star-filled backdrop. The fleet had assembled at the edge of the Centauri sector, where long-range sensors had detected the largest void swarm convergence yet recorded. Intelligence suggested this wasn't just another raid. It was the beginning of a full-scale invasion. The void entities are adapting. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the neural link, now modified to accommodate both human and Arcadian thought patterns. They've observed our reality anchors and are attempting to develop countermeasures. As expected, Vexera replied, her crystalline form shimming with anticipation. Which is precisely why we're not going to use them this time. The combined fleet strategy was unlike anything either species would have developed alone. The Arcadians had contributed their mastery of energy manipulation and quantum mathematics, while the humans had added their unconventional tactical thinking and knack for weaponizing seemingly simple concepts. All ships execute Formation Protocol Artemis, Rodriguez broadcast to the fleet. Named after the human goddess of the hunt, the formation looked chaotic to untrained eyes, but there was a careful method to its apparent madness. The Arcadian ships began generating their traditional energy fields, but instead of using them as weapons or shields, they created a complex network of quantum disturbances. To anyone monitoring their activity, it would appear as though they were preparing their standard, ineffective defense strategy. Meanwhile, the human vessels moved into positions that seemed random, almost amateurish. They powered down their reality anchors and primary weapon systems, appearing vulnerable. The trap was set. Multiple dimensional breaches detected, announced the Arcadian sensor officer. Void entities emerging. Classification shows 5 Omega class and at least 20 lesser constructs. The void swarm emerged in their characteristic fashion, reality tearing apart as their non-Euclidean forms pushed through into normal space. They moved with confidence, their previous encounters with the combined fleet having taught them to expect either energy weapons or reality anchors. They found neither. Now, Vexera and Rodriguez commanded in unison. The Arcadian energy network, which had appeared to be a defensive measure, suddenly inverted. Instead of trying to keep the void entities out, it created a complex quantum cage, trapping them in a space where they couldn't simply slip between dimensions. In the same instant, the seemingly vulnerable human ships revealed their true purpose. Each vessel launched thousands of tiny probes, not weapons, but observation devices. These probes began mapping every aspect of the trapped void entities, feeding data to the combined fleet's quantum computers. The Arcadians taught us something important, Rodriguez explained to her crew as the data poured in. You can't fight what you don't understand. But you also can't understand something if you're too busy fighting it. The void entities, unable to escape, found themselves being studied with unprecedented thoroughness. Every attempt they made to distort reality was recorded, analyzed, and added to the fleet's growing database of their capabilities. Fascinating, Vexera breathed, watching the data streams. They're not actually breaking physics. They're operating on a mathematical framework that exists alongside our own. And now we can see exactly how they do it, Rodriguez finished. Which means we can replicate it, they concluded together. The combined fleet's next move demonstrated just how far both species had come in working together. The Arcadian ships began generating energy fields that exactly matched the void entity's quantum signatures, while human vessels deployed modified reality anchors that didn't suppress the entity's abilities, but rather redirected them. The void swarm, for the first time in its existence, found itself being beaten at its own game. Their attempts to distort reality were caught in an endless loop, their own power being used against them through a perfect blend of Arcadian precision and human improvisation. As the battle concluded, with the void entities either destroyed or forced to retreat, Vexra turned to the quantum link with the Prometheus. "Captain Rodriguez, I believe I owe your species an apology. We thought you were primitive because you approached problems differently than we did. Now I understand that it was our thinking that was primitive, too rigid, too certain of its own superiority. The best solutions," Rodriguez replied, "often come from combining different perspectives. We humans have a saying, 'The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.'" As the combined fleet regrouped and began preparing for the next encounter, both species knew they had discovered something far more valuable than just a way to defeat the Void Swarm. They had found a way to transcend their own limitations, proving that true advancement comes not from perfecting one way of thinking, but from learning to think in entirely new ways. Turning the tide. The dimensional sensors lit up like a supernova. Through the quantum-enhanced viewing screens of the combined fleet, they watched as the fabric of space itself began to tear. This wasn't just another Void Swarm attack. This was their main force, pouring through a breach larger than any they'd previously encountered. By the first light, Vexra whispered, her crystalline form vibrating with tension. The void entities emerged in overwhelming numbers, their non-Euclidean forms twisting reality around them. At their center was something new, a massive consciousness that bent space itself around it like a black hole bends light. "That's their central intelligence," Rodriguez said through the neural link, her voice steadied despite the overwhelming odds. "Everything we've faced so far has just been an extension of its will." The combined fleet held its position, appearing vulnerable and disorganized. It was a deliberate display of weakness, one that had taken considerable convincing for the proud Arcadian commanders to accept. The human concept of playing possum had seemed ridiculous until Rodriguez had explained its historical effectiveness in Earth's naval battles. The void entities moved exactly as predicted, their confidence evident in their aggressive approach. They had analyzed the previous battles, adapted to both human and Arcadian tactics. They were prepared for reality anchors, quantum cages, and dimensional disruption. What they weren't prepared for was something entirely new. "Execute Operation Mobius," Rodriguez and Vexra commanded simultaneously. The seemingly chaotic fleet formation suddenly revealed its true purpose. Each ship, whether human or Arcadian, was positioned at a precise mathematical point in three-dimensional space. As they activated their modified systems, they didn't create individual fields or effects. They created a single, massive topology of altered spacetime. The beauty of a Mobius strip, Rodriguez had explained during planning, is that it appears to have two sides, but in reality has only one. We're not going to fight the void entities, we're going to make them fight themselves. The combined fleet's formation created a similar paradox, but on a cosmic scale. The Arcadian ships generated quantum fields that exactly mimicked the void entity's own reality warping effects, while the human vessels used modified reality anchors not to suppress these fields, but to reflect them back at precise angles. The result was devastating. The void entities found their own power being turned against them, each attempt to distort reality being caught in an endless causal loop. The more they tried to break free, the more they became entangled in the geometric trap. "Energy readings from the Central Intelligence are spiking," reported an Arcadian sensor officer. "It's trying to breach into a different dimensional plane." "Exactly as expected," Rodriguez said with grim satisfaction. Phase 2. The human ships suddenly launched what appeared to be simple probes, thousands of them, filling the space around the trapped void entities. But these weren't observation devices. They were carriers for what the human scientists had dubbed quantum logic bombs, physical manifestations of mathematical paradoxes that the Arcadian researchers had helped refine. As the Central Intelligence tried to shift dimensional planes, these paradoxes activated. Each one forced the entity to solve an impossible equation, creating microscopic points of computational infinity that consumed its processing power. The effect cascaded through the entire void swarm. Connected to their central intelligence, the lesser entities found themselves caught in the same logical trap. Their non-Euclidean forms began to collapse, unable to maintain coherence while trying to process unsolvable mathematical problems. To think, Vexra commented through the neural link, that your species once used similar principles in simple computer viruses. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, Rodriguez replied. We just needed your people's understanding of quantum mathematics to scale it up a bit. The battle, if it could be called that, was over in minutes. Where there had been a massive void swarm, there was now only empty space and rapidly dissolving quantum anomalies. The central intelligence, unable to escape the paradox trap, had collapsed in on itself, taking its entire network with it. As the combined fleet regrouped and began scanning for any remaining traces of the void entities, Vexra turned to her crew. Send word to the Arcadian High Council. Tell them. She paused, her crystalline form shifting in what humans had learned was their equivalent of a smile. Tell them that the humans have taught us how to think impossibly, and in doing so, made the impossible possible. Through the neural link, she could feel Rodriguez's satisfaction, not just at the victory, but at what it represented. Two species working together had achieved something neither could have managed alone. They had proved that true strength lies not in technological advancement or military might, but in the ability to see beyond one's own limitations and learn from those who think differently. Legacy of Earth. The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly had never been so crowded. Representatives from hundreds of spacefaring civilizations gathered in the crystalline chamber, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of galactic diversity. At the center of attention stood two figures, Admiral Vexra of the Arcadian Fleet and Captain Maya Rodriguez of the Terran Naval Forces. The defeat of the Void Swarm had sent shockwaves through the galactic community, not just because of the victory itself, but because of how it had been achieved. The combination of Arcadian quantum science and human innovative thinking had demonstrated something that many advanced civilizations had forgotten: the power of perspective. The void entities represented the greatest threat our galaxy has faced in recorded history. The assembly speaker's thoughts resonated through the chamber. Their defeat was not just a military victory, but a triumph of cooperation and adaptation. We have much to learn from this alliance. Rodriguez stood before the assembly, her dress uniform adorned with both Terran and Arcadian insignia. Humanity didn't defeat the Void Swarm, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translator fields. The Arcadians didn't defeat them either. We succeeded because we were willing to question our own assumptions and learn from each other. Vexra's crystalline form pulsed in agreement. For too long, we measured advancement by technological achievement alone. We forgot that true progress comes from the ability to see through others' eyes, to think in ways that challenge our understanding of what's possible. The evidence of their success went beyond the defeat of the Void Swarm. In the months since the final battle, human and Arcadian scientists had begun sharing their knowledge more broadly. The quantum paradox technology that had trapped the void entities was being adapted for peaceful purposes, creating new possibilities in space travel and communication. But more importantly, the alliance had sparked a cultural revolution throughout the galaxy. Species that had long looked down on primitive civilizations were beginning to seek out different perspectives. The Galactic Assembly had created a new division dedicated to studying alternative problem-solving approaches, recognizing that technological advancement alone wasn't enough to face the unknown challenges of the universe. In light of these developments, the speaker announced, the Assembly has reached a unanimous decision. Earth will be designated as a protected crucible world, a civilization whose unique development path must be preserved and studied. Additionally, we are creating a new position within the Assembly, the Office of Alternative Solutions, to be jointly led by representatives from Earth and Arcadia. The announcement caused a stir among the gathered representatives. A protected crucible world was the highest status a developing civilization could achieve, traditionally reserved for species that had made fundamental contributions to galactic understanding. Captain Rodriguez, Vexura turned to her human colleague, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that humans had learned to recognize as deep emotion. When your ship first appeared in our space, I thought we were receiving a primitive species seeking protection. Instead, you taught us that what we saw as primitive was simply different, and that different was exactly what we needed. Rodriguez smiled, remembering their first encounter. And you taught us that sometimes the most advanced civilizations are the ones most willing to admit they still have things to learn. As the ceremony continued, Rodriguez's gaze drifted to the holographic display showing Earth, a small blue planet that had seemed so isolated just months ago. Now it was becoming a center of galactic innovation, not because of advanced technology or powerful weapons, but because its people had never stopped questioning, never stopped imagining new possibilities. The universe is vast. She addressed the assembly one final time. And we're all still learning how to understand it. Perhaps the greatest discovery we've made is that no species, no matter how advanced, has all the answers. But together, combining our different ways of thinking, we can face whatever challenges await us among the stars. The gathering concluded with a new tradition, a gesture that combined the formal Arcadian crystal touch with the human handshake. It was awkward, imperfect, and exactly right. Just like the alliance itself, it represented the beauty of finding harmony in difference, strength in diversity, and progress in the willingness to learn from unexpected sources. As the representatives began to disperse, a young Arcadian researcher approached Rodriguez with what appeared to be another puzzle box, this one a seamless blend of earthwood and Arcadian crystal. "Captain," they asked, "would you be willing to help us think?" "Impossibly." Rodriguez took the box, feeling the warm pulse of crystal against the cool smoothness of wood. "That," she said with a smile, "is humanity's specialty."